This generation is more educated than their parents were. They have access to more information than any human being who has ever lived on this planet. They can learn a new skill in an afternoon, research an entire industry before breakfast, and consume in 1 week what a previous generation spent a lifetime collecting. And yet, despite more access to information, education, and tools than any generation before, younger people are building wealth slower, and many are staying stuck entirely. Now, the easy answer is always the same. People blame the latte fallacy, the idea that if you just stopped buying coffee and avocado toast, you'd be fine. They talk about money dysmorphia, doom spending, lifestyle creep. And yes, those things are real. But here's what they miss. Many of the people trapped in this cycle are not reckless, they are not lazy, they are not ignorant. Some of them are reading every finance book they can find, Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money, Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Ramit Sethi's I Will Teach You to Be Rich. They are doing the reading, doing the work, doing everything they were told to do. And they are still poor. Because the real cause of this generation's poverty is not found in their spending habits. It is not found in their mindset. It is not even found in their choices. The real cause operates so far above the level of the individuals that most people never even think to look for it. Today, we dive into why this generation may never fully escape the shackles of poverty and the invisible hands that are quietly, methodically, keeping them there. Welcome inside the economy. Let's start with what everyone can see. This generation is poor. Not relatively poor, not just starting out poor. Poorer than the last generation was at the same age. That is not an opinion, that is a measurable fact. And what's strange, what's almost cruel about it, is that it's not only happening to the people you'd expect. It's not just the school dropouts or the gamblers or the ones who never tried. It's the hard-working ones. The ones with degrees, with 2 jobs, with side hustles, spreadsheets, and savings apps. Smart, capable, hard-working people, still surviving paycheck to paycheck, still priced out, still one emergency away from financial collapse. There's an old joke that it's the dumb ones who get rich. And maybe that lands because it contains a bruising truth, that in this economy, traditional intelligence, traditional effort, and traditional financial wisdom don't seem to be enough anymore. So, what is going on? The surface explanation is familiar. Bad spending habits, the wrong mindset, not saving enough, not investing early enough. And there's always another book ready to fix it, another podcast, another guru, another 5-step framework. But knowledge cannot change the man behind the clouds. It cannot move the invisible hand that is methodically pulling the ladder up, rung by rung, just as this generation reaches for it. Most people miss this, not because they're not smart enough to see it, but because it is far easier to blame what we can immediately see and hold. Our own choices, our own failures, our own discipline. Because the mechanisms moving beyond our reach and view are harder to name, harder to confront, and for those who benefit from them, far more convenient to leave unnamed. There is a number that tells the story of an entire era. In the 1980s, the median home price in America cost roughly 3 to 3.5 times the median annual income. This was the deal. You worked hard, you saved for a few years, and you bought a house. It was not glamorous, but it was possible. Today, that same ratio sits at 7 times income, and in the major cities, it is even worse, far worse. And if that wasn't enough, rent, the alternative for those priced out of ownership, now consumes between 40 and 60% of a young adult's income in most markets. Historically, that number was 25 to 30%. The ceiling on what's left to save, to invest, to build with has been dramatically lowered. The home ownership rate for Americans at age 30 used to be around 42% for boomers. Today, for young adults, it sits at 26%. That's not a gap, that's a wall. And here's why this matters so profoundly, why it's not just about having a house to live in. Home equity was the single biggest driver of middle-class wealth accumulation for the boomer generation. Not stocks, not side hustles, not clever investing. A low-rate mortgage that appreciated over decades, forced savings built into the act of simply having a roof over your head. Equity that compounded quietly, invisibly, while life happened around it. Without access to that vehicle, an entire generation is missing the engine. They're watching the race from the outside and being told they just need to run faster. And the cruel irony is that the people who bought homes when prices were low, who benefited from the very appreciation that now prices others out, are often the first to suggest the next generation simply isn't trying hard enough. Here's what makes these structural forces so devastatingly effective. They don't just trap people financially, they trap them psychologically. And once the mind is compromised, the trap becomes self-sustaining. Consider what it feels like to be a 26-year-old watching social media fill up with curated images of people your age apparently thriving. The vacations, the apartment upgrades, the new cars. Your brain, wired for comparison and social belonging, processes this as a signal of threat, of falling behind. And in response, a predictable thing happens: doom spending, the impulse purchase, the lifestyle creep to cope with anxiety. The mechanism is now being exploited by algorithms designed to make you feel inadequate until you buy something. Then there's the other extreme, those who lived through the 2008 financial crisis, or watched their parents lose everything in COVID, or saw their first investment shrink dramatically in the 2022 bear market. They carry economic scars. They become risk-averse. They oversave in cash. They sit on the sidelines, watching the market compound without them, unable to shake the feeling that it's all about to collapse again. Loss aversion, the psychologists call it, and it costs this generation an incalculable amount in missed compound growth. And then, perhaps most corrosive of all, there is what some have started calling financial nihilism. When effort genuinely doesn't yield proportional results for long enough, a rational person begins to question whether the traditional path was ever real to begin with. Homeownership, retirement savings, the 30-year plan? Why bother chasing a finish line that keeps moving? So some pivot to liquidity, cryptocurrency, speculative stocks, high-risk, high-reward vehicles. Others simply shift to consumption. If the future is uncertain, at least the present is real. A debt that was sold as an investment. Since 1980, the cost of a college education in the United States has risen by approximately 800%, adjusted for inflation. 800. In the same period, real wage growth for the bottom and middle earners has been minimal, almost negligible by comparison. The product got 800% more expensive. The salary it was supposed to produce barely moved. The result is a generation where the average student debt burden consumes up to 15% of income. Historically, that number was 4%. That gap is money that is not going toward a down payment, not going toward retirement, not going toward building anything. It is going backward, servicing a decision made at 18 that the entire system encouraged. Nearly 40% of Gen Z say student debt is directly delaying their ability to buy a home. This is not a personal failing. It is a design feature, the extraction of wealth before it can even be built. And then, quietly, in the background of all of this, the wages. Productivity in America has risen steadily for decades. The economy has grown, companies have become more efficient, profits have climbed. And for the workers who made all of that possible, particularly those without college degrees or in middle skill roles, the wages have almost completely failed to follow. Since 1980, real wage growth for the bottom 50% of earners has been between 8 and 10%, total over 40-plus years. In that same period, real wage growth for the top 10% has been over 160%. The economy did not stagnate. The wealth it produced simply went somewhere else. And because essentials, housing, healthcare, education, childcare, have risen faster than wages for the middle, even full-time workers feel the squeeze. Not because they're spending frivolously, because the things a person needs to live a stable life cost proportionally more of their income than they ever have before. There is one more invisible hand, the one that perhaps pulls hardest of all. In 1989, boomers held about 19% of total U.S. household wealth. Not surprising. They were building their lives, accumulating assets, doing what you do. Today, that same generation holds approximately 51% of all U.S. household wealth, and they represent only about 20% of the population. The mechanism behind this isn't effort, it isn't merit, it is timing. Boomers bought assets, homes, stocks, retirement accounts, during a prolonged era of low interest rates and broad market expansion. Those assets appreciated dramatically. And then, instead of that appreciation cycling naturally back into the broader economy, much of it sat, aging in place. Properties held rather than sold, keeping housing inventory suppressed and prices inflated for the generation below. Meanwhile, younger cohorts with similar or higher education levels, working just as hard, hold roughly 1/5 as much wealth as boomers did at the same age. 1/5. That is not a gap born from different levels of effort. It is a gap born from different starting conditions. And someone always says, but what about the great wealth transfer, the inheritance, the $105 to $124 trillion estimated to pass from boomers to younger generations by 2048? It sounds like rescue, but for most people, it is not. First, that transfer is profoundly uneven. The majority of that wealth will flow to a small percentage of households, those who were already wealthy. For the average young adult, the inheritance, if it comes at all, will not arrive until their 40s or 50s. By then, the compounding window is significantly narrower. The decade of equity building has already been missed. Receiving money at 52 is not the same as receiving it at 28. The rescue is real for a few. For the many, it arrives too late to change the trajectory that was already set. And for some, it will never arrive. So let's return to where we began. The assumption was that if this generation is poor, it must be something they're doing, their spending, their discipline, their choices, their failure to read the right books, think the right thoughts, sacrifice the right comforts. But now that the invisible hands are named, the housing lockout, the psychological traps, the debt extraction, the wage decoupling, the concentrated wealth of the generation above, a different picture emerges, one that is far less comfortable and far more true. This generation is not poor because they are failing a test that others passed. They are poor because the test itself has been redesigned. And the system has been extraordinarily good at pointing the finger back at the individual, because that is where it is least threatening for it to point. None of this means there is nothing to be done. Personal finance still matters. Investing still matters. Discipline still matters. But wisdom begins with understanding that the battlefield has changed. that the framework your parents used to build wealth may not be the framework available to you, and that blaming yourself for losing a rigged game is perhaps the most expensive mistake of all. The invisible hands are real, they are structural, and knowing they exist, naming them, understanding them, refusing to look away, is the first and most necessary step toward anything that comes next.